Alrighty, it is 6 o'clock. Hello, everybody who is here. Welcome to the last week of these live stream tutorings until next quarter. Today we'll be discussing plant nutrition and signaling, and let's go ahead and get started. The first part of this is considering growing plants in space. So it says, what do you need to consider in order to grow plants in space, or anywhere else for that matter? Long-range manned space travel and manned space stations may someday become a reality. Before this can occur, however, we will have to develop sustainable methods of agriculture suitable for use in space. One of the key methods being investigated is hydroponics, growing plants in water supplemented with nutrients. I'm going to highlight that because it is something that will come up a few times throughout this. So the first question asks, what type of plants would you choose to grow, and explain the reasoning behind your choices. So, like many of these questions, there are many possible answers. All answers, however, should include how much room the crop needs, what that plant needs it requires for growth, how much of the crop plant produced can be consumed or otherwise used by humans, or other organisms for that matter. So the example that I'm going to use to demonstrate is that it makes sense to grow plants that produce a high ratio of edible to inedible plant matter. Awesome. So, an example of this would be like a potato. It produces a much higher ratio of edible to inedible matter. An antithesis of this example would be a wheat plant that produces a relatively low ratio of edible to inedible matter per plant. So, when the growth system is set up, 2 is basically just not necessarily a question, but supposed to be something to lead us through the rest of the exercise. So, just so you know, minimal answers to the following questions are provided. Most of it just comes from the tables that we're showing you. So, part A of 2. What nutrients would you need to add to water? List what you would need and explain why each nutrient would be necessary. So, these tables that you're seeing here and on the next page identify different kinds of nutrients that a plant would need and what kind of symptoms they would face if they were deficient. So, for example, oxygen. We know that oxygen is a very large electron acceptor in cellular respiration. It's the final acceptor of the electron transport chain, and it's a major component of organic compounds. And so, if the plant were deficient, then it would usually affect the roots. The cells would suffocate, and the roots would rot and wilt, effectively killing the plant. Other examples, other than those, are some other macronutrients like nitrogen. We have discussed a little bit about nitrogen fixation. Legumes are really good for helping the soil replenish its nitrogen supply for plants. Potassium is important, calcium. So to answer what nutrients you would need to add to the water, you could just look at this list and have a combined set in mind for whatever plant you would like to inoculate. Just keep in mind the water pressure that we talked about last time, and how if there is a higher nutrient availability in the surrounding area than the roots itself, water would want to flow out and also kill that plant. So you don't want to put too much nutrients, but you also don't want to have no nutrients. This is about just finding a balance that's best for the plant. So you can go ahead and read some of these tables and get an idea of that. Cool. B. What atmosphere would you need to maintain? List what components you would need to maintain the atmosphere and why each component would be necessary. So the atmosphere should be similar to the atmosphere on Earth for these plants to grow. So this would be obviously a requirement for human and successful plant life. Plants require carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and oxygen for cellular respiration. And so if the oxygen to carbon dioxide ratio became too high, for example, C3 plants would undergo photorespiration instead of photosynthesis, and so this would actually reduce that plant growth and the crop yield. And that's why we think of things of light availability, and also availability of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Legumes, I'm just going to write them down because I do really like them. They fix atmospheric nitrogen, which would reduce the need for additional fertilizer that contains nitrogen. This whole exercise about growing plants in space reminds me of that. Is it Matt Damon? I don't know. I get all of those brown-headed actors mixed, but that one where he's in space and he grows plants. You can think of it in terms of that movie. Forgot what it was called. Okay, C. Which of the requirements in Part B could be recycled, and which of them could not be recycled? Explain. So oxygen and carbon dioxide can be recycled between the plants and animals in the station. The Martian. It is Matt Damon. Thank you, guys. I hope I didn't offend anybody if you're a Matt Damon fan. Nothing against Matt Damon. Okay. Many of the minerals in the plants could be recycled by composting. Composting is a really great way to get some of those nutrients back. So you can compost inedible parts of the plant. And also animal feces. So if you're like me and think that putting dog poop in a plastic bag to go to a landfill is not always the best idea, you can always use it for compost. I do recommend not having that compost bin inside, though. A nice outside compost bin. Unfortunately, you can't have an outside in a space station, but maybe a locked room. Yeah, so without microbes, large quantities of organic waste would build up, and so most compounds other than oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water could not be recycled. And yes, that does include human feces. I'm pretty sure that it can be composted. I'm going to double check that. I wonder if our diet over time has changed that because it is different than animals, but let me see. It says, if properly managed, human waste can be properly composted, but it's normally a no for the general home compost bin, which I mean, obviously no one's going to do that to their own home compost bin, but And I don't know what it means by managed properly. So theoretically, yes, but I don't know the mechanisms behind that. Yeah, true for that too. About the parasites. Awesome. Okay. So, 3, you are interested in growing soybeans that have a higher amino acid content than those varieties that are currently available. How would you do it? The only way to increase amino acid yield, or the composition for that matter, is by selection and breeding of plants with the desired characteristic. Or genetically modifying a variety for higher amino acid content. Is it the between plants and animals, mean that plants and animals? I'm not quite sure I understand your question. Sorry, no, yes I do. I reread it. I just read it wrong. So what I mean by O2 and CO2 can be recycled between plants and animals, I'm just talking about the respiration exchange. So how with us, when we breathe out CO2. That's our respiration. That's what we release is carbon dioxide, and plants require carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So we're just talking about the recycling between plants and animals, how plants use carbon dioxide that we produce, and we use oxygen that plants reduce. So I hope that answers that question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I need to be better about my shorthand. I'm used to just, this is my first year tutoring, and I'm used to just taking notes for myself, so I make little shorthands. But the B, by the way, yeah. Wow, BTW is totally by the way. Okay, yeah, I mean between. Sorry, I'll start writing between out. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I appreciate it. Okay, cool. So, questions 4 to 5. Pine seedlings grow in sterile potting soil. Pine seedlings grown in sterile potting soil grow much slower than seedlings grown in soil from the area where the seeds were collected. Which of the following is a reasonable explanation? Explain your answers. No problem, thank you. So we're going to use these two to answer the following two explanations. So 4 and 5 are posed as explanations, and we're going to say A, yeah, that's reasonable, or B, we don't find it reasonable. The first explanation for why these seeds are not growing as well is the normal symbiotic fungi are not present in the sterilized soil. I would say that A, this is a reasonable explanation for the slow growth because plants have a symbiotic relationship with fungi are better able to uptake the essential nutrients and grow faster. And with obviously, antithesis without the ability to perform these functions with the symbiotic fungi that were in the original habitat, that is obviously a reason for the slowed growth and is a reasonable reason. I guess it wasn't the antithesis. That was a wrong word for that. Anyway, 5. Water uptake is faster when mycorrhizae are present. This is actually A, because recently researchers have found that certain fungi do increase both water and nutrient uptake. So because of this reason, and because we know this plant is lacking that symbiotic relationship, we could assume that the water and nutrient uptake is slower, and that is a reasonable explanation for the slowed growth of these seedlings. Awesome. Okay, moving to 6. 6 is saying you observe the results shown in the graph below by measuring a plant growth in 2 different soils, soil A and soil B. We can see that here, and they're both labeled over here. I'm just gonna... I always like when things are highlighted. Assuming a difference between the soils is present, I am like not reading well today. Assuming a difference between the soils is the presence of mycorrhizae in one soil and its absence in the other. Which soil has mycorrhizae, and how do you know? From looking at this graph, we see that growth for plant B is much better than soil A. And so we can assume that this is due to the presence of fungi that helps the plants obtain nutrition. And so we would say plant B fungi helps with nutrient uptake and growth. And B asks, propose an explanation for why the plants in soils A and B grow at nearly the same rate for the first few weeks. So it's just talking about this section over here where the colors are overlapping. And an explanation for this are that the seedlings have a lot of nutrition stored in the endosperm of the seed. And so they don't need a lot of external nutrition at first. So it's one explanation. Because they're being fertilized in the time. Yes, yeah. So they have, when we talk about how when a seed is dormant, it has all the stuff it needs to grow for the first few weeks, and then once it bursts out, it starts requiring nutrients from the outside. But for the first few times, it actually has a lot of nutrient availability within its own seed to kind of help it grow before growing into a little seedling adolescenthood. Yeah. Another explanation is that when a seed is first planted, like you said, that's a great other explanation too, that there could be nutrition in the soil directly surrounding the first roots, and easily uptook, but then after those nutrients are depleted, the plant gets larger, it needs additional nutrition, but there's no symbiotic relationship with fungi, and so it can't grow further like B can. So what was said in the chat is actually a great other explanation. An endospore, it's kind of, we use it almost like synonymously with the seed, but it is its own little category. So an endospore is basically a dormant version of a seed when the seed is exposed to stressful conditions. And in a seedling, we use the term endospore because it is a harder exterior. It's hard to break down or digest. It can't be destroyed very easily, and it has nutrition within it. Just like an endospore, it's dormant, but that doesn't mean that the cell doesn't have any working machinery in itself anymore. So the endospore is not like a single thing that's inside the cell. It's basically what the cell forms into to protect itself, but it still has all the nutrients and stuff that it needs inside. So I hope that clarifies. Just let me know if you need any additional explanation. I can definitely try to do a better job of explaining that. And now that I'm taking a moment, I'm going to go ahead and put the Google form in the chat. Awesome. Cool, and then we can just say availability in immediate surrounding soil. I'm gonna just say that I don't like the fact that they use the term endospore. Okay, sorry. So I'm just gonna try to make the definitions a little bit clearer. So endospore formation is what usually happens in bacteria, and it's triggered by lack of nutrition. And what happens in endospore formation is that the bacterium, it divides within its cell wall. One side engulfs the other, and then basically it forms this hard shell, and it's able to have that engulfed live cell lie dormant for an extended period of time, even centuries. But for seeds, sorry, my pen is freaking out. So yes, so kind of like, okay, cool. So you got okay, sorry. You already answered that other question. Yeah, so don't think of it like an endospore. An endospore is something that happens with the bacteria, happens when there's no nutrient availability. What happens with seeds is that seeds have food kind of stored within it. And it's stored in something called the cotyledons. And so within that, it's like a nutrient storage within the cell. So it almost looks like a little embryo sac with where the plant is going to grow from, and then there's nutrients also inside of it. So it's something completely different. Seeds are hard on the outside just to protect them, but there's just don't get too lost in the weeds, and know that there is a little bit of nutrients within the seed to help the plant kind of get its first legs out there. So I hope that helps. I'm sorry that they used that terminology in the explanation. Yeah, of course. Awesome. Okay, this last half is talking about the relationship between gravity, light, and plant growth. So number one of the problems associated with growing plants in space is the lack of gravity. A, how does gravity affect the normal growth of a plant's roots, stems, and other parts? Explain the mechanisms involved. We know under the influence of gravity, just to have a little recap, auxin accumulates on the lower side of the root stem, and higher auxin concentrations stimulate the cell elongation in the stem and inhibit cell elongation in the root. So it has basically a detector of gravity. It knows how to go against gravity, where the stem should grow in order to have access to light. In the shoot region, that's what simulates cell elongation, is within the shoots. You know how we say roots and shoots, and so that's the stem. And so according to the acid growth hypothesis, auxin concentrates in this range and simulates proton pumps, which lower the pH in the cell wall. And so this activates enzymes that break the cross-links between cellulose and allow the cell to elongate. And so that's how gravity affects the plant normally, is that auxin is the main driving force for elongation. B, how would lack of gravity affect normal plant growth? Lack of gravity would affect plant growth in that when the plant is first planted, for lack of a better term, so when the seed is underground, there's no light available, it's buried below the soil, there's no light for it to respond to or to give it any signals, so it's completely reliant on gravitrophic responses in the shoot and the root to orient the plant above ground and underground. So it relies on gravity to tell where the roots and shoots will go. And so, in the absence of gravity, auxin concentrations in the root and shoot would not actually vary. There would be no gravitrophic responses or signals for the plant to respond to. And so, neither growth of the shoot toward gravity and growth of the growth of the shoot away from gravity and growth of the root toward gravity, neither of that would occur. So the orientation would be off. C. Propose mechanisms to overcome the problems associated with lack of gravity. Plant orientation can also be affected to light. Like we said earlier, the reason why it responded to gravitrophic responses was because during the time that a seed is planted, there is no light for it to respond to. That is a good question. I'm trying to look that up. I actually do not know the answer to that question. I'm so sorry. I tried to look up those plants and specifically that type of plant's gravitrophic responses and if it relies on gravity, and the only thing that I'm getting is general stuff about plant life. But I will... Oh yes, no, I know. But I'm pretty sure... I still do think that gravity would affect vines because you always ask me puzzling questions because they do really rely on light. So I think yes, I think that no, do not apologize. Do not apologize at all. It's good for me to be researching and thinking about other things than I studied, so this is good. But I think gravity would affect it because vines are moving up. You know, like we think about the poisonous vines that will affect trees, and you'll see them growing up the trunks. There's atmospheric pressure still on those vines, and so it is requiring some energy for it to move upwards. And so I would think that in an environment where there was less pressure, like higher elevation or something like that, or maybe they would grow faster, or... But I know that they're most adaptable to high gravity environments because they don't have a rigid trunk or anything. This is a very good question. I hope that it is okay with you. I'm going to message you and ask for your email, and then I wanted to email Dr. Reddy, Dr. Wolf, and Dr. Kautz about this. Would that be okay if I did that? I feel bad not knowing the answers, but I also don't want to, like, tell you guys anything that I don't know. I hope that is okay. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. That was a very good question, and I'm sorry I didn't have a more refined answer for you. Sorry. Okay. C. Propose mechanisms to overcome the problems associated with lack of gravity. So some mechanisms are introducing light when germination is happening. This way they have something to respond to. So if you have a light overhead, that can maybe stimulate them to grow upwards towards that source, for example. So we can just say that counteracts gravity. Here's another one. I was trying to think of another example. So if plants are grown hydroponically, like we said above, suspended in water without soil. Then we can put a dense mesh mat a little bit like around the top, just to prevent roots from growing above water. That's kind of another way to make sure that it's growing upright. And to answer your question, yes, that's exactly right. So it doesn't have the same, it's not a gravitrophic response that it's getting from light, but the light does counteract gravity by showing the plants it's giving it a signal of where a light source is. So if light is shining ahead of the plant or above the plant, then it will want to reach up towards that light source. And so that's what we're saying by counteracting gravity. Gravity isn't present, but we can use other sorts of stimulation to have the plant grow toward that need. So it's going to grow towards that light availability. Okay, last home stretch. Another problem with growing plants in space relates to a plant's light requirements and phototrophic responses versus the photoperiods required for the plant to flower and produce fruit. Yeah, of course. So, A, how do phototrophism and photoperiodism differ? So, phototrophism. It's the growth of a plant towards or away from light. And so we're saying generally shoots grow towards the light. Roots grow away. And so, again, this response is because of the asymmetric distribution of auxin. So that's what phototrophism is. Photoperiodism is a physiological response to changes in day length. So, for example, this response is what can cause flowering in some species of plants because the flowering is triggered by the changes in day length. And so they'll know, when it's springtime, we say how, flowers come a lot in spring. So they'll notice that from winter, the days are actually getting longer and they have that kind of internal clock and they can begin flowering. B. What light characteristics would you use to maximize plant growth per unit time? And to answer your question, not quite. So xylem and phloem are really just mechanisms for nutrient transport. So xylem, transports water. Phloem transports that sugar and good foody stuff that the plant needs. What actually causes the roots to grow away and the shoots to grow above is the distribution of auxin in plants. So auxin is that hormone that is produced in plants, and so it's that uneven distribution of that hormone. So the hormone is more distributed into the shoot that's growing towards the light and the light and nutrient availability up top to get photosynthesis. And in the roots, it doesn't grow as much as the shoots because it's more concentrated on, surface area to volume ratio and getting out those nutrients from the soil. So I hope that helps. It's more to do with the hormone auxin. Like we think about, growth hormones and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty cool. Plants are awesome. Plants do not get enough credit. They get credit, but they don't get enough credit. Humans do too much research on ourselves. I'd like to focus on some plants sometimes. Thank you. So yeah, cool. So what light characteristics would you use to maximize plant growth per unit time? So we know the chlorophyll molecules in photosynthesis, in photosystems 1 and 2, they respond and absorb light in the red and blue wavelengths. So we talk a lot about the distribution of light spectrum and what the plants actually use in photosynthesis, and we've seen that a lot of those photons come from blue and red. And so if there's no other limiting factors, we could maximize plant growth by using the red and blue light available. We'll just say lamps. And the more lamps you have of these red and blue lights, the faster the photosynthetic rate per unit time. Alrighty. What kind of physical environments would you need to maintain appropriate phototrophic responses among plants? In space or lab, we would need overhead lights, red and blue light bulbs, it's not necessarily so for the wavelengths, it's not necessarily what they do, it's just what the plants can use. So like for us, when we eat, we can eat a large range of things, but we can't eat grass. It's more of like the plants can eat the red and blue wavelengths, but not necessarily the other, like that's not, the other wavelengths are not what they use for energy. So it's just more that the red and blue wavelengths we found through science are what plants use most to grow. And so in a lab or a space environment, we want to use those two to help them grow. It's just, yeah, it's the photons they like to use. They like their red and blues. They like their complementary colors. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Happy that helped. Light bulbs. So we talked about the hydroponic growth system with those mats involved to help with root growth. So yeah, this is just kind of summarizing what we've talked about. So physical environments, we would need overhead lights, red and blue light bulbs, hydroponic growth systems, those mats, and oxygen availability. And CO2 availability. Oh my gosh, my spelling. Hydroponic, all that means is it just means growing plants in water that are supplemented with nutrients. So instead of putting a plant in soil, you're just putting it in a tube of water, and then you're just adding nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and stuff, and it helps the plant grow that way rather than actually needing soil from the earth. So if you see, those like Pinterest, or I don't know, I'm not even on Pinterest, but those cute like hanging plants that are submerged in water, that's what hydroponic is. It's just a plant in water. And they're really cute, and they're nice to have at home, and they're really easy to maintain. Cool. Awesome. Last one. What design modifications would you need to make to support plants with different photoperiods, for example, long versus short day plants? If different plant species had different photoperiods, then what we could do is just grow them in separate chambers. And then set up timer controlled lights to regulate the number of hours of light a day. And if you are a gardener like myself, this is something that I sometimes do for plants that take a little bit longer to grow. So you can like put them in, what I like to use is like old egg cartons, not the styrofoam like white ones, but the cardboard looking ones. And you can just plant little seeds if you're starting from seeds rather than going and getting like a tomato bush. Sometimes I'll start with seeds. And then, yes, let me get you that Google form. But yeah, so starting from seeds, then I'll like have some lights that are actually timed, because in the winter, of course, we don't have as much light as we do in the spring, and so it'll be timed for 8 hours a day or something like that, and then it'll help the seeds pop out of their little shell and the plants to start grow before planting them actually in the garden. So these tools are widely used by home gardeners like myself. But other than that, yeah, that is it for this week and this term. I wish you guys the utmost luck on finals. I hope to be here again next term with you all. So yeah, I'll stick around for a little bit longer if you guys have any questions. But if not, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to need good luck on finals. I have 2 on Monday. So studying, not this Monday, but finals week Monday. So studying hard for that. But thank you guys so much. You're always so nice and kind. I really appreciate it. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and go if there's not any more questions. And I hope you guys have a lovely spring break, and I will see you all next term. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.